Hey guys, welcome back to the channel where I cover missing persons, unsolved cases, crime news, and more. So this is another video going through parts of the trial against Christopher Greger. For those that are not aware of this case, Christopher Greger has been charged with child endangerment and murder for the death of his son, 6-year-old Corey Micciolo, on April 2nd, 2021. There is a video. I showed it in the last video I made for the first one here on the channel. You're welcome to go back and watch it because I'm not going to re-show it again. It's pretty disturbing to watch. On March 20th, 2021, security footage from the gym at the condo where Christopher Greger lived showed him allegedly forcing little 6-year-old Corey to run on the treadmill. As he sped the machine up, Corey falls off, and his father picks him up by his shirt and forcefully puts him back on the machine and continually forces him to stay on it, and he falls about 5 times before he finally slows down the machine and allows Corey to get off of the treadmill. Now, Corey's mother, Bruising Micciolo, these two are not married. There's quite a history there. She and Christopher, they were dating. I'm going to put that as in air quotes. When Bree was 16 and he was 20 to 21. And Corey was born when Bree was just 17 years old. And they have had a shared custody battle, which we're all familiar with in a lot of these cases involving these poor kids. She noticed bruises on Corey and found out that it was from falling off the treadmill. She took him to the hospital and tried to get a judge to rescind custody of Corey from Christopher, to no avail. And then on April 2nd, Corey died in a hospital. So today I'm going to play portions of the independent doctor testifying for the state regarding the autopsy and how Corey died.
Doctor, were you contacted by the Ocean County Prosecutor's Office in regard to the decedent, Corey Micciolo?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors why you were contacted?
I received initial contact from the Ocean County Prosecutor's Office in September of 2021. They asked me to review material related to the death of Corey Micciolo with an eye toward rendering an opinion as to cause and manner of death.
Now, Doctor, did you prepare reports in regard to your findings and opinions regarding this matter?
I did.
Your Honor, if I may approach counsel?
Yes.
I'm now showing you what has been marked S50, S51, and S52. Do you recognize those?
I do.
And can you tell the jurors what those are?
S51.
Are those your reports in this matter?
Yes.
And would those reports aid in your testimony today?
Yes.
Now, did you perform the autopsy of Corey?
No.
Can you tell the jurors who performed the autopsy?
Dr. Ragasa, Dante, I believe is his first name, Dante Ragasa, of the Ocean County Medical Examiner's Office, performed the autopsy examination on Corey.
And when was the autopsy performed?
Autopsy was performed in April of 2021. Let me see what the specific date was. On the 3rd of April, 2021.
And did you review the autopsy report authored by Dr. Ragassa?
I did.
And what other materials did you review to formulate the basis for your opinions?
In addition to the autopsy report, I saw the images that were generated in association with the autopsy, and I examined the histological slides, and we'll talk about those momentarily, the slides that you look at under the microscope. So I looked at that, and then I had medical records from 3 different hospital facilities. I believe it's County Medical Center and Jersey Shore Medical Center and South Ocean. I saw medical records from Ivy Pediatrics, which were Corey's pediatric care provider. Certainly I saw police documentation, law enforcement documentation. I saw some telephone records. I had access to a video of Corey on a treadmill. And subsequent to issuing my first report, I received additional materials. I did receive an expert report from an infectious disease specialist, Dr. Feingold, and a report from a defense pathologist expert, Dr. Bodden.
Did you also review video from April 2nd of 2021 from the decedent's mother's phone occurring around 9 a.m.?
Indeed, I did, yes.
And you also reviewed autopsy photos?
Yes.
Do you have an opinion, after you reviewed all of this material, in regard to the decedent's cause of death?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors what that opinion is?
I'm simply going to quote from my report, because it's a mouthful, and we'll break it down. But Corey died of blunt impact injuries of the chest and abdomen, with laceration of the heart, left pulmonary contusion, and laceration and contusion of the liver.
And can you explain to the jurors, when you say cause of death, what does that mean?
Cause of death is, it sounds simple enough, but it's something that's very specific. Cause of death is the disease or injury or combination of those things that initiates what's ultimately a lethal train of events, and without which death would not have occurred. So there are many, many, many causes of death.
And what about blunt force trauma? Can you explain to the jurors what that means?
In forensic pathology, there are various kinds of external forces that can act on the body. There could be penetrating trauma, such as that from gunshot wounds or stab wounds, or there can be blunt impact injury. And in that situation, you have force applied to the body over a much broader area than a single bullet or blade would cause. That blunt impact could be a small area or a large area, but it produces a different kind of injury than penetrating trauma does. And the kinds of injuries associated with blunt impact include contusions or bruising of the skin or internal organs, lacerations, tearing of tissue because of the result of the blunt force applied to it, or fracture of bone.
And what affects blunt force trauma and the impact on the body?
Well, the impact can be anything from minor to life-threatening. If you get up in the middle of the night in a strange hotel room and hit your shin against a nightstand, that may raise a contusion. But all that is bleeding under the surface of the skin, and that will resolve over time, and that will be fine. If you were to fall against that nightstand, you might sustain a laceration of your scalp. That may require stitches, but likewise you would recover from that. if you sustain any of these kinds of blunt impact injuries with sufficient severity, it could conceivably bring about your death if they were severe enough.
After reviewing the materials in this case, did you formulate an opinion as to the decedent's manner of death?
I did.
And can you tell the jurors what your opinion is?
Corey's manner of death is homicide. While there are many, many, many causes of death, typically in forensic pathology, there are only 5 manners of death. And manner of death is simply a one-word description to explain how a death came about. And those 5 are natural, accident, suicide, homicide, or in rare instances, undetermined. In Corey's case, in that these injuries could not have been inflicted by himself with any kind of intent, it's certainly not suicide. These injuries, given their pattern and distribution, are consistent with having been inflicted by another person. Therefore, any death that is related to the actions of another person is, from a medical examiner standpoint, from an epidemiological or public health standpoint, homicide. Now, it doesn't have any legal significance, but that's the way that a medical examiner certifies it. So Corey's death was at the hands of another person, therefore it is a homicide.
This doctor is, to me, he explains this so well. How this was a homicide, period. And Corey didn't do this to himself. And I think his testimony is going to be very damning. And of course, the treadmill video, I mean, that's damning as it is.
Does a case histology impact the determination of manner of death?
Well, it can in certain instances. If you have a gunshot wound to the head with a perforation of the skull and brain, histology or examining tissue under the microscope doesn't add a whole lot. But in a case like this, certainly the examination of the tissues under the microscope was helpful in reaching my conclusions.
Did you make any findings regarding Corey's medical records from Southern Ocean Medical Center on April 2nd of 2021?
And I'm going to ask you to clarify that a little bit because I'm not entirely certain what the question is.
Did you review the medical records from Southern Ocean Medical Center on April 2nd of 2021?
Yes, I reviewed those records from April 2nd.
And can you tell the jurors if that helped to formulate your opinion as to cause and manner of death?
It did, yes.
And can you explain why?
Well, Corey presented to Southern Ocean at around 3 o'clock. At that point, he was already in serious medical condition. He was ashen, gray, in a shock-like state, and was fairly medically unstable. There was an attempt to make an assessment as to what might have been going on with him by doing a CT scan, and he got worse in the CT scanner to the point where he underwent a cardiac arrest.
And doctor, did you review any blood work from that hospital?
Yes.
And did that impact your conclusions?
Yes.
And what about any post-mortem CT scans?
He had a post-mortem CT scan. I don't find those of particular value, certainly compared to an autopsy, as to determining cause and manner of death. But I did see that there was a post-mortem CT scan, and I looked at its result.
Did you review the medical records from Jersey Shore Medical Center the evening of April 1st of 2021?
I did.
And can you tell the jurors about that?
Well, that particular visit was at the end of a sequence of events wherein Corey initially was seen by his pediatrician. There was some concerns about these bruises that Corey had as to whether or not this represented some mistreatment or child abuse. So Corey was referred to the emergency room, and I believe Corey and his mom went to one, but then they went to Jersey Shore after that. At that examination, he had a physical done, and they documented the various bruises that he had on different parts of his body, none of which were life-threatening. His clinical status at the time was perfectly stable. He was normal. He was conversational. He spoke with the doctor. He gave history. He made some disclosures. They also did some blood work and an x-ray of his chest, and all of that was completely normal.
Did you review the findings from Dr. Ragassa's autopsy performed on April 3rd of 2021?
I did.
And can you tell the jurors what Dr. Ragassa's findings were?
So Dr. Ragassa received, the body was taken to the medical examiner's office, I believe, the night before, but Dr. Ragassa performed his examination on the 3rd and documented all of the bruises or contusions that were on various aspects of Corey's body. Those were the primary external findings that he had. But an autopsy is a very detailed surgical examination of not only the external aspect of the body, but the internal aspect as well. There's a large Y-shaped incision made from the shoulders to the middle of the chest and down the center of the body, allowing the pathologist to take a systematic examination of each of the organ systems. It was during that internal examination that Dr. Ragassa saw and documented several abnormalities. There was a large contusion of one of Corey's lungs, I believe it was the left lung. Examination of Corey's heart externally didn't show anything, but on the internal examination of the heart, after the heart was opened to reveal the chambers of the heart, a laceration or tear in the tissue was revealed near the apex, or the tip of the heart, on the inside wall of the heart. Below the diaphragm is that flat muscle that divides your chest organs from your abdominal organs. Below the diaphragm, on the right side where the liver lives, there were two injuries that he documented. There was a laceration or tear in the liver tissue on the right edge, the right lateral aspect of the liver, and there was also a contusion or bleeding underneath the capsule of the liver on the front edge of the liver. There was a small amount of free blood in the floor of the pelvis, undoubtedly associated with the liver laceration.
Did you also review autopsy images?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors specifically what image 151 depicted?
Image 151 was of a pulmonary contusion, meaning a blunt injury of the lung associated with bleeding. Now, there was a picture of it. It's obviously that you can see. It's obvious that you can see it. It does not appear in his narrative description, but it's depicted in the photographs.
And can you tell the jury about image 153?
Well, I'll have to refer to my report on that.
Yes, doctor, if you could.
Oh, 153 was a picture of the free blood that was in the pelvis.
Can you tell the jurors about images 163 through 170, please?
Those were various views from different angles of the liver injuries.
And what about images 172 through 178?
Those depicted injuries in different parts of the body. 172 to 75 were hemorrhage in the retroperitoneal tissue. Sorry about the jargon, but I mean, that's where it was. What is that? The abdomen is lined by a lining called peritoneum. Retroperitoneum means bleeding underneath the peritoneum, and this was toward the back of, where the backbone is. 76 to 78 was similarly hemorrhage. It was contusion, and it was in the area of his left ninth rib. That may well be what was associated. That trauma on that side may well be what was associated with the contusion of the lung itself on that side. And then, yes, so that takes us up to 178.
Okay, doctor. And did you review images 196 through 200?
Yes.
And can you tell us about those?
These images were, I should preface this. Mm-hmm. I explained when I was talking about when an autopsy is approached in general, how you do that incision in the front. In cases where it is important to do, the death of somebody in police custody, for example, or in this case, a potential child abuse case, you do a similar examination of the back. So you turn the body over, and an incision is made along the midline of the back, and that skin is reflected so that you can see the muscles of the back. These images, 96 to 200, or excuse me, 196 to 200, depicted soft tissue hemorrhage or contusions along the spine or the backbone that you could not see necessarily on the surface of the skin. There were certainly contusions on Corey's back, but there were also contusions that did not correlate with deep contusions that didn't correlate with contusions that were on the skin.
Can you tell the jurors about the myocardial laceration depicted in image 0205?
Yes, and this is complicated. So you all remember from high school biology, right? The heart has these four chambers, the two upper chambers and the two lower chambers. On looking at Corey's heart from the outside, all that could be seen was an epicardial contusion on the front of the heart. The epicardium is just the lining of the outside of the heart. So he has a visible contusion on the outside of the heart. But it wasn't until the heart was opened in such a way that you could see inside each of the chambers that this laceration was revealed. On the left ventricle, which is the lower left chamber of the heart, that's the muscular one, that's the one that pumps blood out to the rest of the body. There was a tear in the tissue. Dr. Ragasa described it as about 1.5 inches, and that comports with the photograph. A horizontally oriented tear near the tip or apex of the heart into the muscle. It didn't go all the way through the heart wall. It was just a tear of the heart muscle in the internal surface of the left ventricle.
Doctor, did you review images 206 to 220?
I did.
And can you tell the jurors about that?
This was a series of images of scalp contusions. Corey didn't have a lot to see externally. On the scalp, there was maybe one abrasion or contusion near an eyebrow. But when one looked at the skin, or underneath the skin, there was a contusion on the top of his head and a couple of contusions on the back side of his scalp that you couldn't see on the surface.
Doctor, did you make any findings regarding bruising on the decedent's body, which was significant in regard to your formulation of your opinion?
Well, in assessing the potential for child abuse, it's not so much that contusions are life-threatening in and of themselves, but it's the pattern and distribution of injuries and also the presence of injuries of varying ages that suggest that a child has been mistreated. And Corey had contusions over a wide area of his body of varying ages, from under his chin, his head, his trunk, his extremities. There was one fairly large one just on the left side of his chest that looked to be fairly large, and that had been previously assessed. And particularly the presence of contusions on the back without a pretty clear-cut explanation it's not diagnostic of abuse, but it's very suggestive of abuse, certainly given the company that it's keeping. So my concern was not so much with the severity of the bruising, but the pattern and distribution of the bruising as being suggestive of child abuse.
Doctor, did you make any findings regarding the decedent's liver?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury?
Well, as I said, there were two injuries. One of them was fairly minor. It was on the front edge of the liver, and it was a contusion. That's not particularly uncommon after CPR. But there was a second, more significant injury, and that was out on the right side, the right lateral edge of the liver. It was described as a superficial contusion, but the photos clearly show that it's a contusion that goes fairly deeply into the liver tissue itself. And under the microscope, this was not a super fresh injury, so this was not an injury that could be attributed to CPR. So those are the two findings involving the liver.
Doctor, were you able to formulate an opinion as to the time frame when these blunt force trauma injuries were inflicted?
Only in a general sense, giving a range of time. To dispense with the contusions first, many of them were sampled under the microscope, and many of them were pretty much all healed, or mostly healed. You could see something on the surface of the skin, but not much going on underneath it. So other than to say on my gross inspection of these bruises, they appear to be of varying age, that's as far as my opinion regarding the bruising. The internal injuries, on the other hand, have a little more objective evidence to offer in terms of timing. And the basis for that is something called the inflammatory response. So what does that mean? When tissue is injured, there is a fairly predictable sequence of events that occurs in the body's attempt to repair itself. That's what inflammation is, or one type of inflammation. So that inflammatory process involves the appearance of certain kinds of repair cells to the area of injury at a fairly predictable time, within a fairly predictable time frame. So I examined both and I did not generate new slides. These were slides that were done at the time of the original autopsy. So slides of the heart injury and slides of the liver injury. And in both of those injuries, there was a fairly well-established acute inflammatory process there. Though the cells that make up the acute response are called, I've got to say it because they have a name, they're called polymorphonuclear leukocytes. Wow. Let's just call them polys. So polys are recruited to the scene within hours after an injury like this. The second wave of inflammatory cells are called mononuclear cells. Those were pretty rare. I only saw those here and there. After that, And those, take up to like 24 hours to get there. And then after 24 hours, you actually start to see some attempt to heal the tissue. Fibrins laid down, and you see other cells called fibroblasts. Those weren't present. All I was seeing was this acute inflammatory process that was fairly well established. And that was in both the heart and the liver. What does that mean? Well, that means that, in my opinion, these injuries occurred at roughly the same time, and their age could have been as recent as 4 hours, but as old as 12 hours prior to when Corey actually died at 5 p.m. on the 2nd. That was the finding based on the histology. Additional evidence that I saw fine-tune that time frame a little tighter.
And doctor, can you tell us about the additional evidence that you saw to fine-tune that time frame?
So if you think about that time frame of 4 to 12 hours, that would have been from 5 a.m. the day before to about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the 2nd. There was a video that was alluded to, and it wasn't an intentional video. There were no people in the video. You could basically see that the phone was on a car seat or something. And, Attorney Lento, have folks seen this video? Do they know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. So it appears as if the phone was like on the car seat or something. And it was represented to me that this was Corey's mother dropping him off for custodial care with his father. And they were having a conversation. Well, this was at about 9 o'clock. Corey was answering questions. He was conversational. He was normal. Audibly. So if that's at 9 o'clock, the period of time of injury from 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock, in my mind, is eliminated. A person with these injuries is not going to be responding like Corey would in the car. So that puts us between 9 a.m. and approximately 1 p.m. I can't narrow it down any more specifically than that, but I am confident that that is the range of time in which Corey was injured.
Now, doctor, in conclusion, based upon everything that you have reviewed, what is your medical opinion regarding the cause and manner of death of Corey?
Corey Micciolo died of blunt impact injury of the chest and abdomen with laceration of the heart, contusion of the left lung, and laceration and contusion of the liver. It's a traumatic cause. The manner of death is homicide. It was at the hands of another person. He didn't do it himself, and it didn't happen accidentally.
This is hard to listen to, and I cannot imagine the jury having to see the actual autopsy photos of Corey. But Dr. Andrew, I think, again, he's a great witness, and he is convincing. He knows his stuff. He's got many, many years of experience, and his findings, along with Bree's accidental video that morning, give everyone a timeline that Corey was again beaten by his father, Christopher. After he was dropped off, he was beaten, and later that day, that's what caused his death at the hospital. He was beaten to death, period. And again, thank God for that treadmill video. That's some proof of the things that Christopher did to his son, and the photos and every single documentation that Bree worked to get on her son. And it's, again, it pisses me off that a judge allowed him to go back to his father. If he would have stayed with his mother or his grandmother, he would have been alive. I firmly believe that. Corey didn't have to die. Again, Christopher's the one that caused his death. Christopher murdered Corey. But the judge who denied Bree's petitioning to keep Corey away from his father, he, in my opinion, is an accomplice. We've seen this happen way too often. And while CPS, Child Protective, Services, all that, they have a lot to answer for, these judges, we're seeing how much these judges can either save a life or determine that maybe they're going to die by giving them to the wrong person, the wrong parent, the wrong custodian. And that judge, he should have to answer for that. But we rarely ever see that happen. So this video I was going over, I wanted to go through what the forensic pathologist had to say. I will post the complete link to the testimony of Dr. Andrew. I think, again, that he's an excellent doctor and a witness. And the next video, I will go through what Christopher's parents have had to say. They are in a lot of denial, from what I gather. Neither one of them have watched the treadmill video. Now, they haven't testified in front of the jury yet, but they told the court last week that they haven't watched that video. And I think, in a nutshell, I do think that his grandparents, Christopher's parents, I think they really loved Corey. I do. But they are in deep denial still to this day that their son, Christopher, beat their grandson to death. Alright guys, that's all I've got for this one. I hope you have a great rest of the day. And most of all, stay safe.